T minus 30 seconds. T minus 20 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Kush's Corner here on the Trap Talk Reptile Network, the coolest reptile network in the world. Tonight, I'm joined by Michael Coone. We have a really interesting discussion to get into tonight. Michael is at the forefront of working with Louisiana pine snakes and black pine snakes. And for anybody who knows anything about those snakes, they have very, very limited gene pools in captivity. They are ESA listed, so that leads to not only limitations as far as what you can get gene pool wise, but then also legalities within the US government. We'll get into all of that as well as far as transport goes. So a lot of really cool stuff to get into tonight. I'm excited about this conversation. For any Pituophis fan, this is a must listen episode. Before we get into that, as always, USARC. So USARC is the organization that is fighting for our rights to keep our reptiles, to run our reptile businesses, to live this lifestyle. Check out usarc.org for all of the information you need to know about the organization. usarc.org is also where you can find alerts on any pieces of legislation, either at local levels or the national level, as well as updates on any pieces of legislation that are introduced at any level. That website is also where you can become a member of USARC. As a community, we have strength in numbers, and the more people that are behind the cause, the better. And here we are. Thank you to everybody for tuning in. If you are here on YouTube and you are not already, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. A new podcast comes out every single day of the week here on the Trap Talk Reptile Network from some of the best hosts in the industry, talking about a wide variety of topics within reptiles. We are also, though, on all of the audio platforms as well. If you are more of an audio listener like myself, we are on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, wherever you get your podcast from, you can find the Trap Talk Reptile Network. A follow, 5-star review on any of those platforms that you use would be most appreciated. And with that housekeeping out of the way, let's bring Michael onto the show. Good evening, man. Thank you for being here with me tonight.
Thanks for having me, Stephen. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So kind of to get this conversation started, for anybody who is watching or listening who's not already familiar with you, kind of give us a little bit of your backstory, life and times within reptiles, and kind of what has brought you to where you are today.
Okay. So I started keeping snakes back in 1983 as a young boy. I remember 84 scoring real high on an achievement test, and my dad told me that if I could beat that score the next year, he'd get me anything I wanted. And I scored a 99, which meant 99% of the kids across the U.S. scored less than I did on this test. And so he kept his word. And what I wanted back then was a boa constrictor. And so Dad got me a boa, and I think I was like 8 years old. And so that was, I think the fire had been lit before that, but that really kind of motivated me and got me going. Kept snakes off and on through the years. In 2004, I got the first big promotion at work, and I treated myself by going out and buying the snakes I'd always wanted, which were a couple of Florida pine snakes. I can't keep northerns in North Carolina, or couldn't back then. And so I got Florida pines, and that just started the real fascination, because once you get them in your hands, you realize they're different from all the corns and kings and milk snakes and things that you kept before. Yeah. Shortly after that, I met with Wayne Vandevender at Appalachian State University, and he introduced me to the Escambia pines. And he also told me the backstory of the Escambias and how they went from Paul Moeller to Ab Abercrombie to him. And I thought that was fascinating, the history and the lineage. And so that kind of, for me, started a new interest for me, is to kind of understand the history and lineage of some of these rarer species that you just can't find just anywhere. And so that would have been maybe 04, 05. And so ever since, I've kept pine snakes, ever since then. Black pines, Florida pines, later on Louisianas, and I just fell in love with the Louisianas.
Mhm.
Dr. Giacomo Meeker introduced me to the Louisiana pines almost a decade ago, and
Okay.
I'd never seen one. And he and I had a conversation. He told me about them, and he introduced me to my first pair, and man, I just fell in love. I've been keeping snakes all those years, and I've never had a snake I enjoyed as much as those snakes. And then they were up for federal protection in I guess 2018, and I'd kept black pines long before they were protected in 2015.
Okay.
Or federally protected, I need to say. I think black pines have been protected by the states they live in since probably the 70s.
Okay.
But the Louisianas, I fell in love with them to the point where I'd bred a little bit of this and a little bit of that since 2004. Corn snakes, milk snakes, king snakes. I kept pretty much everything I get my hands on all those years. And then I had such a deep fascination with the Louisiana pines and black pines that I started working myself out of the rest of my collection and making almost all my collection Louisiana and black pines.
Yeah, that's I mean, I feel like for a lot of us that the idea of focusing so much on a particular project or two seems kind of daunting, considering, like you were saying, us reptile nerds, we kind of like a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Was there a particular moment or thought you had of like, wow, this like would be in my best interest to really focus, or was it just a matter of you found what you really, really liked and you're like, I really now want to dedicate all of my time to these animals?
Like I said, I kept so many different species of snakes over the years. I really these guys really represented everything that I liked in a snake. They get big, but not too big. It's not like keeping like a Burmese or a tick,
Right.
But they get really big. They're impressive, the size. They're fairly easy to handle. They've got a great feeding response. The babies are easy to start. I'd worked with things like mole kings, scarlet kings, Central Plains milks, things that were impossible to start babies. And then you get these guys and they hatch out and they're already 2 feet long and taking small mice. And so they're easy. And so that was a big part for me. I guess I'm not very patient with babies that are hard to start.
Me too.
So you know what I mean? It's like, these babies are easy to start. The adults are huge. The babies are huge. They're diurnal snakes. You see them a lot. I think they're more intelligent than your average snake. They don't mistake you for food often. If they do, it's usually just a movement. They pop. But once you're holding them, they don't do the king snake thing where you're holding them and they sniff you, and then they bite you. Like they don't ever do that. And that's kind of like, they don't ever, I mean, they seldom musk. You get a few of the younger ones that are a little nervous, but they're just really pleasant snakes to keep. And I fell in love with them. That and the fact that they needed so much help. I think that was a big part of it for me as well. It was purposeful. And so as you get older, you like, well, hey, what do I want to do, for the world? And you think about, how rare these guys are, especially good, diverse stock and captive collections. And, I was just super motivated to move everything in that direction. And I've done that. I started doing that maybe 2018, and I've virtually moved my entire collection over towards those 2 snakes.
Okay. Yeah, that's something that is admirable to see within, herpetoculture. And frankly, I'd like to see more people do is find a species or a couple species or a genus that is severely underrepresented and in, in potential peril based on the fact that nobody is really focused on them, and really, dedicate time and effort to doing that. So, that's very, very admirable to do that. Like I have a friend who he's about my age, but he's really dedicated to sailfin dragons and water dragons. And he's doing like the same thing that you're doing. He has like lineages traced back like 30 plus years on some of his animals, and develop particularly with the Philippines, that, same thing, like with these pines, Philippines are closed down. So what we have is what we have. So, I personally love seeing that type of effort being put towards that. I mean, how difficult is that for somebody who's just a herpetoculturist to like put their mind to a project like that? It probably seems more daunting than it really is, right?
It's a lot like dating and marriage. When you're first starting to date, you find out what you like, and you're dating different girls, you're going different places, you're doing different things, you're figuring out how to date. And I think that's what we all do when we first start keeping reptiles. You like, I'm not sure if I like this or I like that. And you get different kinds of snakes. For me, it was always snakes. But you keep all different sorts. And as you keep them and work with them, you realize what traits you like, what traits you don't like. And eventually you figure out what you really love. And then that's just the start. At that point, you got to figure out, like, how does this work? Who has the best stock? How do I, get in with those folks? How do I develop a reputation where people want to come to me for things? Because, you start getting momentum with some of these things when they see that you're trying to do it right. And you have people reaching out to you and saying, hey, I've got this particular stock of this animal. This is my lineage. Yeah. And it starts to grow. And that, like I said, a lot of this for me started with Wayne Vandevender. And, Wayne's an interesting guy. You pick up any of your old field guides and you can look to the back where all the credits are for the photos. And Wayne took a lot of those photos for those old field guides back in the 70s and 80s. So he's been a guy who's been around for a long time, and he did a lot for herpetology. He was a biology professor at Appalachian State University. And I think it started with him. And then over the years, it moved on to Dr. Meeker, a gentleman named Rusty Rollins, who's also been a huge mentor for me, kind of teaching me how to do all this. So it was just making those contacts, and then those folks seeing that, kind of what your value system is, and kind of getting to see what your integrity is all about. And you have to prove that over time. Like, none of that stuff comes easy. You have to be a certain person over a period of time to all these people, and they realize that you're going to do what you say you're going to do. And, sure. You expand your network, and you get access to animals you might not have had access to, animals you don't see on the websites where people are selling things, because they're too rare. They're too hard to come by. You don't see a lot of my animals make it to like Fauna or MORPH Market or anything like that, because, every year by the time my females lay, I already have a list, and, and I work through that. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And, that is a good point as well of, once you specialize, then, from a business standpoint, the sales really come to you if you get known as the guy for whatever you're working with. And then, that makes that process a whole heck of a lot easier.
It really, really does. Like I said, I don't advertise. Folks reach out, and I think folks know me. They know I'm always going to try to do right by them in terms of customer service. They know the quality of my animals. I can talk to you all day about the lineage of just one of my animals, because I've taken that time to trace that back, not just to the person I got it from, but where did they get it? And then where did they get it? And I try to go as far back as I can go. And, I think that makes a difference when people see that effort that you're putting into. You got a few animals that you really love, and then you're putting this maximum amount of effort into trying to, be knowledgeable about where these animals originated. And then you try to apply that and have some good customer service with it. I think people really, they appreciate that, and they come to you.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that also, it sets a great tone for the new keepers. And, we'll get into this in a little bit. We talked a little bit beforehand about, in the past, Louisiana pines haven't been hybridized. Mm-hmm. I believe it was with bull snakes. But if the people who are coming to you see how you operate, you're laying the groundwork, you're setting the template for, this is what a Louisiana pine snake keeper does, acts like, how they treat their animals. Yeah. So I would have to assume that with your mindset kind of leading the chase, the chances of any of your customers taking those animals and hybridizing them are probably almost zero.
So I'm actually I'm really picky about who I'll sell to, and who I'll work with. And so if I see someone post something on social media that mentions anything about hybridize, or if I see they have hybridized any species of snake, I block them. If I see someone talk about, hey, I'm going to mix this and mix this, I block them. So I try to eliminate the opportunity for those people to even get to me to contact me about a purchase. Because I just don't want to risk that. I think these animals are too special. And if I've seen anything about a person that makes me think that they might not be trustworthy with something like that, I just usually don't deal with them. And on the other hand, I don't think those aren't the kind of people seeking me out. They really aren't.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like I feel like black pines are a little more recognizable than Louisiana pines, even though they're still pretty obscure.
Yeah.
If you know enough about a Louisiana pine snake to seek out a breeder, man, I'd have to imagine that the amount of effort that you would put into that wouldn't result in, all right, time to breed it to a bull snake or a northern pine. Like, that's just not the mindset of somebody who would go through all of that trouble to find pure animals.
Yeah, I agree. I just don't see those kind of people dealing with me. And like I said, I don't really deal with those kind of folks either.
Sure. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I kind of want to start to get into some of the details.
Sure.
I guess, interesting a question I have to start off. At this point, what are the animals you can trace back the furthest? Do you have like a lineage or two where you're like, all right, I have data going back however many decades on these animals?
Oh, wow. Like 30 years on some of these Louisianas.
That's awesome.
I've got several Louisianas you can trace all the way back to the original people who found the wild caught animals. The black pines are harder because they were protected so much earlier.
Okay.
And so, I can go back to zoo stock for most of those. But, I had a conversation with Terry Vandervetter just a couple weeks ago, and he was saying, a lot of the zoo stock, these are originally animals that I caught and bred prior to them going to the zoos. I think Terry was the first person to breed black pines and catch up. People know him for the Louisianas, but I think he was the first person to breed black pines also.
Oh, okay.
And so he was the originator of some of those that went to zoos. So I've gone back as far as zoo stock, but we're talking decades for sure, like decades. There's some of the, so I have some animals from Terry. Terry didn't sell to private collections for 20 years. I have some from him. Animals that I think he brought 11 original animals out of the wild like 30 years ago.
Okay.
I have animals that trace back to a gentleman named Mark LaChain. And Mark, this is a really interesting story. Mark lives in Canada, and he originally saw an ad in Reptiles magazine, like way, way back. I want to say 30 years ago. He saw one that Terry had published, reached out to Terry by mail, and I think he purchased 16 of Terry's offspring. So Mark, guys like Mark, you learn from that. It's like, okay, he got a lot of offspring that were as close as possible to wild caught, like F1, offspring. A variety of those, had 16 of them, and he worked with those. So that started my wheels kind of churning when I talked to guys like that. And I'm like, so that's part of the key is going back as far as you can, as close to wild caught as you can, known lineages, and then you need several animals, unrelated animals, so that you've got diversity within your collection, genetic diversity within your collection.
Yeah.
And so I've got those. There's other guys, Michael Montezuma. He had a wild caught animal that was collected in Louisiana when they were still legal to collect. John Ginter, Theron Majors. These are all folks, KJ Lodrich. These are all folks who, are either from Louisiana or have traveled to Louisiana, spent a significant amount of time there, were able to find wild caught stock, like I said, 20 plus years ago. And then the animals I I've been able to trace those back. And one of the keys, I think, is not just knowing where I got it from and taking that person's word for it, but saying, like, where did you get it from? And then going out. And the nice thing about, social media now, you can find people and contact people.
Yeah.
Going to that person and saying, hey, look, I've got this animal from this guy. Did you give it or sell it to this guy? And where'd you get it from? And doing that homework. And so I think that's a big piece of, tracing that lineage and going back as far as you can. With so few of Louisiana's were taken out of the wild, it's a little easier to trace those back to wild caught animals than it is the black pines. I think the black pines are probably more abundant within, both of them have very small home ranges, just a handful of counties. But I think the black pines were more abundant within that small range than with the Louisiana. I think the Louisianas have always been rare. I think we cleared out a lot of those longleaf forests before we even knew they were there. And so I think they've just always been super rare, is my understanding. And so it's easier to trace back to wild caught because there just weren't that many taken from the wild.
Sure. So I assume you have more of an idea with Louisiana than black pines, but do you even have a ballpark of how many wild caught animals there were that ended up adding to the captive gene pool eventually?
What I know here with the Louisianas, what I know based on my collection. So you got the Terry had the 11. I know Mike had one. John had one. John Ginter had one. Theron, I know he's a professor at Northwest State University of Louisiana. Okay. And my understanding was that he had put some ads out in local papers for some of his students. And his students, because you got to have lots of eyes on the road if you're going to find any kind of pine snake, Yeah. And so he was able to secure some wild caught animals there. I don't know exactly how many, but I do know his animals were legit because a lot of his were also used with the Memphis Zoo relocation programs. And I know they're super picky about what they'll use. I know KJ at least had one wild caught female. And a Vernon Parish animal has made its way into this, but I don't know who secured it or whatnot. But there's some Vernon Parish genes. So you're talking about, less than 15
Yeah.
animals that I'm aware of. And I'm sure there might be some under the radar that nobody knows about. But that's not a lot of animals to start a gene pool. But I will say this, that's more than what the Andeans had, the Andean milk snakes that were
Okay.
originally brought over in the 80s by Steve Hammock. The black milks, they came with an original. Now there's a lot of different black milks now, but you know, for years and years, all we had were the one group of black milks that were brought over. And the Lineaticolis, again, just a handful of those came over, just a few of those came over. And so
Okay.
the black milks and the Andeans did a lot better over the years with such a small pool than a lot of the Pituophis have. The Pituophis are a little more sensitive to that
Okay.
genetic bottlenecking.
Okay. So of the animals that Terry originally collected, was there any chance of any of them being siblings that he had found and collected, or was he specific of trying to get animals from here or there to try to make sure that they are fully unrelated stock?
They have such a small home range. It's I think a lot of what came into private collections were already from a species that had a genetic bottleneck within the wild, because
Okay.
it has such a small home range. And I think that's why the Louisianas are so sensitive, because you can get to F3 and you start running into issues with
Okay.
Louisianas if you don't make a real concerted effort to have unrelated stock. Like I've had clutches before when, you know, I've worked with people and I've gotten Louisianas from them that I've bred, and either they were too closely related or the males were just infertile because of too much inbreeding. I don't think it takes a lot of generations to run into that. And that's another reason why you don't see morphs and things like that in Louisiana, is because they
Sure.
just, I think there was too much of a genetic bottleneck in the wild to begin with.
Okay.
And which makes keeping them, you got to be a lot more responsible, even more so with keeping those, because you do a couple generations of sibling breedings with those guys, you're going to have infertile eggs. You're going to have babies that are hard to start, that don't have the same feeding response, or they don't have the same defense response. You're going to have smaller offspring or smaller adults. I'm going to show you guys, I've got a Louisiana here and a black pine here. Like some of these guys are big snakes, and I think having that genetic diversity is really important to get the most robust animals that you can possibly have as well.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I feel like you hear that discussion of inbreeding depression in Pituophis a good bit.
Yeah.
Lots of people in like the python and boa world will make claims of, they don't really experience inbreeding depression, or you can work your way around it. And, in some cases there may be something to it, especially once you look at some like Australian species or whatnot, where, we've been genetically bottlenecked on those for decades upon decades. But, I think it does seem that some of the colubrids will see that effect faster, whether it be pits or Drymarchon or whatever it may be. I guess aside from the few issues that you already kind of talked about, is there anything else that you look for? Let's even say in acquiring a new animal, not even something that you produced. Are there any, let's say, for a buyer looking at a snake on a table at a show, are there any like visual indications that you can look at and kind of get tipped off that this animal may be from an inbred pairing?
Oh, wow. I think knowing how big the hatchlings are, if the hatchlings are smaller than normal, sometimes you can, I actually, so the Escambias were a great example. The Escambia pines all came from a pair of snakes.
Okay.
Paul Moeller, when he was a wildlife biologist in Florida, acquired a pair of wild caught animals, and he gave them to Ab Abercrombie, who was a professor at Wofford College. And Ab has bred several generations back to the early 80s. The original Escambias, the male was supposed to be close to 8 feet long. The originals.
Damn.
Now, if you get Escambias now in the hobby, they're going to be F4, F5, and they're going to get maybe 5.5 feet long. They're not going to get as big. So size is one of the things that you kind of look for. The size, how robust is the animal?
Okay.
You won't be able to choose based on feeding response at a show, but you can look at the overall health and size. I have found a correlation between the defensive response in hatchlings and the feeding response, meaning that if the hatchling hisses and kind of bluffs a little more as a hatchling, it tends to eat a little bit better for me. I work really hard to manage the stress of my collection, to decrease the stresses, because the bluffing is a defense response, and I try not to encourage that as much as possible because I want to keep the stress low. And I do think there's some kind of generational transfer of stress with those animals as well.
Yeah,
Whether
sure.
that's just because one animal's naturally more high strung and passes those traits on to its offspring, or whether you create more stress and somehow that stress is transferred to the next generation. We've got data that shows, my day job, I work in social services. We've got data that shows that trauma passes on from generation to generation in people. And so I don't know why it couldn't in snakes. So that's another thing I look at as a defensive response. If a pine hatches out and it's hissing and fussing at me, that's usually a good sign. It's a healthy pine snake. You know, you could handle them and you could feel how robust they are in your hands, how they move. Me personally, morphs are not for me. Because if you're, to me, a morph is a recessive gene in most cases. And it's going to potentially bring in some other recessive genes that I don't want. And to express those genes, there's usually some kind of inbreeding that took place somewhere along the line. So I tend to avoid that completely with any of the animals I work with. And I'm not judging anybody who does, because they're beautiful. And so, I'm not taking that stance, but it's just not for me. That's not what I'm looking for at all.
Yeah, sure. I definitely get that. I kind of, I don't want to say go back and forth. I'm definitely more of a wild type guy than a morph guy, but I'll appreciate myself a morpher too. But definitely,
some of them are beautiful. I'm not knocking them, but for what my goals are, my ultimate goal here is that 50 years from now, people are able to have pure Louisiana pines and black pines in their collections, private collections. That's the goal, and so that's what I'm really striving for. Is when I'm long gone, that's something that I leave behind for somebody else.
Absolutely, yeah, that's incredible. Yeah. So I want to kind of get into a little bit of the more practical side of this. Talk a little bit about your husbandry. So I guess we can kind of start from the ground up. Obviously, for anyone who knows, babies are freaking huge. How are you setting up your baby pine kind of right out of the egg?
So again, going back to the concept of managing stress. One thing that I've learned is when they hatch, or when they start to pip in the incubator, and they all hatch, I will move the nesting box into a tub in a rack at that point, and I'll just crack the lid on the nesting box. I put newspaper or water dish in the box, and I'll leave them in there. We usually all stay in the nesting box together until they start to get close to time to shed. Okay. As they shed, they all I let them, so I guess the long story short, I kind of let them emerge naturally. Okay. Because I'm trying to decrease their stress as much as possible. So unless there's just a reason why I need to go ahead and sex them and figure out what I have earlier, I usually just wait and I let them emerge on their own. I let them go through their first shed before I ever separate them or do anything, because I want to minimize their stress. Okay. And so once they come out and they shed, I separate them into their own individual cages. I just use a little hatchling rack with the long hatchling tubs. I put them on newspaper with a tiny water dish. I melt tons of holes in all my tubs. Pituophis seem to enjoy lower humidity. And so I start hatchlings on newspaper just because I don't want them swallowing substrate. I use pasta boxes, paper towel rolls, things like that for a hide, because it's easy just to throw it out and get a new one. I'm very much I'm more your traditional sanitary keeper than I am your your naturalist keeper. Sure. In terms of my habitat setups. So I keep them on newspaper for probably the first year. And then as they graduate up from that hatchling rack to a, 16 quart or 32 quart, at some point they'll go over to I use pine bedding. Okay. I've had a lot more success going to the big industrial places to get my bedding than I don't buy bedding from pet stores. I've heard too many nightmares about people getting mites in their bedding. And so I get my bedding from the big industrial. I try to get low dust. I'll get pine or aspen. Sometimes I'll mix pine with Carefresh. Okay. Like you use for your rabbits or whatnot. And, and it seems to be really nice as the animals get bigger to kind of absorb some of the mess. But so as they graduate up to a bigger tub, I will switch over to using like a cereal box for a hide. I like the cereal boxes again because I can throw them out if they get soiled. It's easy. Keep the water dishes small. With the neonates, I usually my black pines average about 60 to 65 grams each when they hatch. I usually start them off on large pink mice. Okay. Frozen thawed right off the bat. I will take a stick pin and I'll kind of brain them so they smell like something and I usually feed them inside their hides. Again, low stress. My Louisianas, I'll start those off on rat pinks, frozen thawed rat pinks. And I have a guy out here who breeds rats. He's been supplying me for like 8 years. His name's Chris Salisbury. He operates a business called the Gorgon's Head. He builds cages and things. He does a lot of cages for me too.
Cool.
And I purchased rats from him, and I start those off on the rat pinks, and I go really slow with the babies. Like the first 6 months, they'll hatch in like September or whatever, and then I don't move them up in a prey size until the following May. I'll keep them up all winter, the first winter, but I keep the prey fairly small. I don't rush them at all. I don't, knock on wood, I don't ever have trouble regurg with those two species, but I have had a black pine that was particularly voracious once that hatched. And I thought, I'd heard stories about people getting black pines to 6 foot long within 1 year. And so I thought, I'm going to see if I can do this with this animal. And I pushed it too hard and I did get a regurg. And so I don't play with that at all. I'm very slow and methodical. My plan is to get them to maturity at 4 to 5 years.
Okay.
That's kind of what my goal is. So I'll go very slow. But I move them up through the size racks. One thing that's really important that I've learned is to keep the tub size pretty small for the hatchlings. If I move them to too big of a tub too soon, they seem to stress and they'll go off feed. And I see that with a lot of buyers as well. And I try to caution folks against, because they get so excited to have one of these beautiful animals, especially the baby black pines. And they want to put them in a display. And so they get a baby that's been in a shoebox with me and is eating well. And then they put it in an aquarium display in their living room with everybody walking by, and then it stops eating. And so that's a big thing I try to encourage people, like, hey, keep it small, take your time with it, move up gradually up your cage sizes. And so they'll end up, some of the adult Louisianas aren't quite as big. They can stay in a CV70. Some of them are bigger and end up in I have 5x2 boa files.
Okay.
That they move into. And again, the black pines will all end up in a 5x2 and then fully mature, because they're a little bit bigger. They're all, around 6 foot, some a little bigger, some a little smaller, but around 6 for the black pine.
Okay. Very cool. And then what about the temperatures? Are you doing like an ambient room temperature, hot spots? How are you doing that?
I set up, my racks all have heat tape.
Okay.
My big displays, they all have, I use Ultratherm heat pads. The Ultratherms are nice because they only go to like 90 degrees. So I don't worry so much about a fire or overheating, but I tie everything to a thermostat, and I run, my room temps are a little cooler, maybe 70 to 73 on the room temp, with the hot spot being 80 most of the year. My gravid females get 88. I give them a little bit warmer temps because those eggs are huge and it's hard on those girls to develop those big eggs. And so I bump their temps up to 88, just during that 2 or 3 month time of the year when they're developing eggs and they're but other than that, it's usually 72 and 80. Okay.
Do you see those gravid females really hugging that hot spot once you introduce it?
They really do. It's funny because they might not use the hot spot the rest of the year. Even though they eat big meals, they may not use the hot spot, but they will use it the entire time they're gravid. They will lay on it the entire time. And that's another big reason why I don't cohabitate my pits, because the male will try to hog the hot spot from the female during the worst times of the year. And so I keep them. What I usually do, I know we'll talk about breeding in a minute, but I do a 5x2 kind of split with those, where I feed them and leave them apart for 2 days, and then I put them together for 5 days.
Okay.
Throughout the entire breeding season until they're, and when they're gravid, they're huge, like they're just massive, and there's no doubt. And even after they have that pre-lay shed, I introduce the male one more time just to make sure that I got it right.
Yeah.
Because I bred a lot of king snakes and different things over the years. And I had Pinellas back, the old Crisco Pinellas that were huge king snakes. They were like 6.5 foot long and massive. And the females would ovulate and they would be so big, I thought I had gravid females, and I wouldn't reintroduce, and I'd miss windows and things like that. And so I always give them one last intro. And then you can tell, they don't want anything to do with each other at that point. I know I'm good.
Okay.
And so
makes sense. So on the feeding subject, just for another minute, what do you shoot for as an eventual prey size for your adults? And then at what age are you ideally wanting to get them to that ultimate adult prey size?
That's a great question. So again, I probably go slower than most. My ultimately, what I'm going to do with my adult females are going to get 150 grams per week. I weigh all their food,
Okay.
and I start weighing food once they get off of pink rats. I start weighing the food because I can't eyeball it, and I get my rats from a local guy. I don't, I get like backup stuff from a company that ships them in because I use a lot of rats and mice and hamsters and chicks, but the majority of my stuff comes from a local breeder. And so, he does a really good job of getting them together close, but sometimes I get a bigger one or a smaller one. So I weigh everything to make sure. And, 150 grams for my adult females is what I shoot for week to week. And that might be 100 grams plus 50 grams. And that might be some combination of a rat and a hamster or a rat and a chick.
Okay.
These guys can eat. Like I have fed them before like I said, I get these all from a friend of mine who breeds them. There's times I might get a 275 gram rat, which is a huge rat. They can eat these guys with no problem.
Okay.
I just don't do it every time. If I got one in there, I'll feed one of my big girls and they do great with it, but I just don't make a habit of feeding that much each week. So I do 150 grams a week on my adult females. My adult males are a little less, between 75 and 100. I try to keep males a little bit leaner and meaner. What I have found over the years, if I feed my males heavily and they get a little overweight, they're not as good of breeders as if I keep them a little more, like a little slimmer. And I have a male here, I'll show you in a minute. You can see slim doesn't mean slim, it's just not as big as the girls, and you'll see what I'm talking about. So I try to get them to that prey size by 4 years old is what I'm shooting for. So again, I go really slow. I creep my way up. I've got some right now, some black pines in Louisiana's up there right now that are maybe 2 and 3 years old, and they're all on the 50 to 75 gram range right now for the females. Like I go really slow because you always got more time, and that's one of the things too we'll talk about. You got such a small gene pool here that you're working with. It's not a race. You really want these animals. And I learned a lot of this from my friend Rusty Rollins. He's got animals he's had in his collection since the 80s. Like these pine snakes live a long, and some of these guys will still produce when they're this old. And so, I think you want a long-lived animal. So you don't want to push them. You don't want to race to get them to breeding size. Take your time. I go into it thinking, hey, this is going to be 5 years. And like I had one this year that was, I shoot for a snake to be 4 years old and 1,600 grams before I breed it, because the eggs are humongous and I need a big female to pass those eggs.
Yeah.
I had one this year and she was right at 1,500 grams and 3 years old. So I didn't want to breed her. I thought she was too young and too small, but she ovulated. Because I have a very small collection, so I spend a lot of time. I can recognize, when my animals are going through those things. I have so few animals, and I didn't want to risk the snake trying to pass infertile eggs and getting stuck, because I know there's a higher risk of those getting stuck. And so I introduced a male when I know she ovulated, and she laid 3 good eggs for me. And she was a little undersized at 1,500 grams and 3 years old.
Okay.
I didn't intend to do that, but just because of where she was. So some of it, the snake kind of directs you into what Mother Nature wants to do. And I think paying attention to some of that. But as a general rule, I'm looking at 4 years old, 1,600 grams. And I don't mind going 5 years if that's what the animal wants to do. I'm not pressuring. I'm not in a hurry.
Okay. Couple questions off of that. But first, so with that female who you bred at 3 years old, do you have any concern about that early reproduction potentially stunting later reproductions, or will she just power right through and then end up at that 1,600 gram size next year where you want her and maybe have 5 or 6 instead of 3?
It's really neat. She just, she only laid 3. She's already gained weight. She's already passed the 1,600 gram mark, and she did great. So a lot of times they will kind of guide you.
Okay.
Like I have a female black pine here that's just really big. She's about 6.5 feet long, and she lays for 4 years straight. She's laid 15, 14, 15, and 14 eggs. And those are massive clutches considering the size of those eggs. It gives you an idea how big she is. but it takes her the rest of the year to put weight back on.
Yeah, sure.
Because it takes so much out of her. And I had someone come visit this past weekend to pick up a pair of babies, and I got mom out, and I was like, hey, mom's a little underweight right now. Now, don't get me wrong, mom's underweight is still about 2,000 grams.
Sure.
Like, she's still a big, healthy snake. But when springtime comes, before she starts, she's going to be massive. She's going to be 2,500 grams. She'll put on that extra weight. Yeah. But I kind of let them take the lead. So this younger one, I do concern myself with if I tried to breed early, but because she moved in, she did it. And so she's coming along, she's gaining. I do make sure that when those things happen, I target that 150 gram mark on the food, because I want to make sure I'm giving her everything she needs to grow into the snake that she's going to be.
Sure.
And so it remains to be seen, what she does in future years as far as her continued growth and how big she gets. But she looks great now.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, I asked because I've experienced that with a couple of pits that I've bred where they will go at 3 years old, they'll do their thing, and then next year they'll almost double the clutch that they had the previous year, especially if they recovered properly. So that's where, like, with ball pythons, I used to hear a lot when I used to be into ball pythons, breed a female too young, you can kind of mess her up for whole life. So
yeah,
I think that's a difference between a inactive, low metabolism python and a highly active, highly metabolic colubrid. So
yes. And, and I work with these girls too. I have such a small collection. I take them out in my front yard and let them crawl one at a time, make sure they're getting extras. I'll walk around and grab their tail, kind of like give them a little resistance so they have to pull against me while they're outside. I do things with them to make sure that they're active and healthy so they can pass those big eggs too.
Sure.
So I do that with them in the spring, especially the first year, because I want to make sure they're ready for that, because that's a task. Those eggs are massive.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I've never seen them in person, but I believe you sent me a picture of, was it a Louisiana pine next to a bull snake egg?
Yeah.
And you just,
yeah, it's like you could fit like 6 of them inside of one egg. It's crazy. Yeah, it's just crazy. They're seriously, they're duck eggs.
Yeah,
they might be bigger than duck eggs.
So you've alluded to it a couple of times about you having a small collection. How large is your collection?
I have less than 20 animals.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
okay.
I have less than 20 animals, and I have a pair of Lineaticolas.
Okay.
I have a pair of Stewart's Milks, and everything else I have are black pines and Louisiana pines.
Okay.
So yeah, I have around 15 between the two, not counting my hatchlings, because I got babies, because you have to wait on permits and stuff for babies to ship out. And so I've still got some babies here that I'm feeding for buyers, but yeah. I honestly, if I could get it down to 12, I'd be happy. I'm just, I know most folks keep getting more and more, and I have to fight that urge. Like, I feel that same urge, but for me to do it right and spend time with each animal that I really want to spend, I think keeping it under 15 is probably best for me,
Yeah, that sounds just, I can't even wrap my mind around that. I'm trying to get down to 200 right now.
Yeah. And that's most of my friends. I totally get it. And I've been in a similar situation in the past with snakes as I was kind of coming up, but now it's like, I just want to enjoy each one. I want to give them the best I can. And the longevity of the animal is really important to me. And so I want to keep these guys for, if I can keep them for 25 years and keep producing for 20, 25 years, they're going to take up space in my collection. So I can't really focus on bringing a whole lot of new stuff in,
Sure.
But don't get me wrong. If I know there's a different lineage out there that's available, then I'm going to, I want to get my hands on that to diversify my collection, and I'll make room for that. But I don't, otherwise I want to keep it as small as I can and just focus on the longevity of the animals.
Yeah.
Because if I made it a race and I said, okay, I'm going to push, in 3 years, I'm going to produce another generation. In 3 years, I'm going to produce another generation. Sort of like what folks do with, corn snake morphs and things like that. I've hatched corn snakes in 18. I've had a 22-month-old corn snake lay a clutch of eggs for me in the past. You can push them, and they'll breed really small and really young. If I did that with these guys, because the original genetic pool is so shallow, I'm going to run into problems in just a couple of generations. So I want to do the opposite of that with these guys. Yeah. I want to play the long game. I want to stretch it out, raise them slow, try to keep that animal producing for 20 years if it's possible. just like I said, like Rusty and like a lot of the folks before me have taught me, so that, you know, we prolong that genetic diversity as long as we can.
Yeah.
For, you know, so those snakes are still around. If I made it a race, we wouldn't have Louisiana pines in 15 years.
Yeah, no question. So I want to talk a little bit about breeding, but kind of at the beginning of that, about your brumation process.
Yeah. Okay.
So I guess, when do you start brumation, and do you ramp down, or do you do a hard one day up, one day down kind of thing?
Okay, great question. So I stopped feeding. Halloween weekend is my last feeding for
Okay.
my adults, and then I put them down Thanksgiving weekend.
Okay.
So I have a really busy career outside of the snakes, and so I use holidays to keep track of things. And so I put them down Thanksgiving. The room I keep them in is above my garage, so it's naturally a little cooler, and it kind of moves just slightly with the temps outside. Like right now on a really cool night, I'll be in the upper 60s. So it's gradually kind of doing its own thing in there. But if they still have their heat on, I don't touch their heat until Thanksgiving, because I want them to have that option. And then, you know, Thanksgiving, I put them down. And again, it's still fairly gradual. I live in North Carolina, which are pretty mild winters. And so when I put them in my garage, it may still be 60 degrees, 65 degrees in my garage when I first put them down. And that's gradually going to decrease as it gets closer to January 1st. You know, by then it'll be 45 or 50 in the garage. I brumate them from Thanksgiving until St. Patrick's Day. So that's 4 months. Okay. And the average temp out there is about 50 degrees for that time. And it'll fluctuate. It'll go as low as 40. It'll go as high as, you know, 64 or whatever during that time, depending on what the weather's doing outside. And I just let it fluctuate, because I feel like that's probably what they're doing in nature anyway. If it dips down below 38, which it has, like it's really rare here, but we had like a stretch of like 3 days in a row that were like 9 degrees or whatever, a few winters ago. And I may have to bring them in for a night. Okay. Just because I don't want to risk them going, you know, below 35 degrees, 36 degrees. So if I see that, I bring them in. But I leave them out there. I check them. I have racks set up in my garage for them, for the brumation racks. And so I check them every couple weeks. They have, I put pine bedding in, I put a real small water dish, and I put a couple cereal boxes. Or for the big adults, something I really like to use are the soda cases. You know what I'm talking about? That you get like a 12-pack of soda cans in. They really like to use those as a hide. And so I use those. And so I just check them every 3 weeks. So make sure they have water. I give them a once over. I just kind of look them over, look at their eyes, listen to their breathing, check them out, make sure they're not running into issues. I've been real fortunate, knock on wood, that my brumation snakes come out looking great. I haven't had a lot of issues there over the years. And I've been doing it for, like I say, like 21 years. Breeding them. But so I do that in the garage, and then I bring them up St. Patty's. Something that I would note for Pituophis breeders is I bring my males up a week or two before I bring my females up. Okay. And my purpose in that is to get a meal or two in my males before my females come out of brumation, because as soon as the males, and some females will brumate right out of brumation, just like a week, and some it'll take a month. Depends. But as soon as the male smells the first ovulating female in the room, he stops eating. Okay. And he won't eat until the last ovulating female in the room is finished. And so this will save folks a lot of frustration in working with pines, is I really don't even try to feed my males from probably April until June. Okay. I don't even really offer, because they're not going to eat most of the time. Sometimes they'll take a chick, but and I think that's probably something that's probably evolutionary, where these females lay these giant eggs, they need so much food. The males probably go off food during that time to allow there to be more food available for the females, is what my assumption would be. Okay. But yeah, so I try to get them out early to get a couple meals in them, so that they get a little head start, because they're not going to eat. They're going to be really busy through breeding season. And so, on the other note, whenever the last female is finished around, you know, early June, whatever, the males are ravenous. And so you got to watch your fingers when you open the tubs, because they'll literally fly out of the tubs at you. And so you kind of know, and that's another way you know that your males are sexually mature, because you can have a young male that, you know, because the males will become sexually mature before the females will. If I've got a young male that goes off, I'm not thinking anything about breeding him yet. I'm like, he needs another year or 2 years or whatever. But he goes off feeding in the spring, then I know, like, okay, this guy, he's sexually mature now. He's smelling girls and he's not interested in eating. And so that's an interesting kind of note that I've kind of figured out over the years with the males. One thing about keeping just a few different types of snakes is you really learn a lot about those snakes. You know what I mean? And so just by specializing on a couple species, you learn a lot about them. And by keeping a small collection, you pay attention, you learn a lot about them. And so that's really fun. It's really rewarding.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So when you're pulling the males up early, are you taking them out prior to St. Patrick's Day, or is that when you're bringing the males and the females come out a couple weeks later?
Yeah, give or take. I might bring the males out St. Patty's and give the females an extra week. I might bring the males out a week before, give or take. I just use St. Patty's as kind of a line market, kind of a note in my head to keep up with that time.
Sure.
But it's give or take. So I don't think it matters. It can be a week or two before or after for the two. I finished my MPA a couple of years ago, and so my last semester was a spring semester. And you know, you've got a big paper and all this stuff you have to write to finish graduate school. And I was so busy, I waited till April to bring any of my snakes up that year, and everything went fine. It was just a later, you know, everything happened later that year.
Okay.
And so I don't think I don't think there's an exact science to it. I do believe the pits take longer than the corns or the kings or the milks to brumate. Whereas my smaller colubrids, I would do 3 months. I would have always brought them up on Valentine's Day back when I used to breed those. Yeah. I do give that at least that extra month for the pits. They seem to do better with the extra month.
What benefits have you seen from giving them that extra month? Like what do you see when you don't brumate them the full 4?
I always have. I think I'd read something about it in the old kingsnake.com Pituophis page about giving them 4 full months. And so I don't think I've always given pits 4 months just because that was what I'd read. So, you know, I would love to hear if other people only give them 3. I'd love to hear that. Most of the other guys that I kind of go back and forth with, they do 4 months also.
Okay.
And so that's just what I've always done with them. So I've never tried a 3 month to see what would happen.
Oh, okay.
So I don't know.
Cool. Well, hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So how long after you bring them up are you offering the first meal?
Oh, great question. About 2 days. I offer them something about half the size of what I would normally offer. So if a girl was going to get 150, she gets 75.
Okay.
2 days after. And then she'll take that. I give her, she'll take that. I wait 2 days. I go ahead and introduce a male. And I give them 5 days and I start that cycle. And then the next time I feed them, I go ahead and feed them 150 grams. They start from there.
So
and then
it's not even a full week out of brumation. They're getting paired up.
Right off the bat. Some of them will breed right off the bat. You don't want to miss it.
Yeah, sure.
And I've known a lot of guys this past year. I've talked to a few of my closest friends and they're like, yeah, I think I just missed it. I don't think I paired them soon enough.
Wow.
And so, I don't waste any time. And there may be some difference between the different subspecies as to which one, like your Florida pines, I think tend to go a little bit later than your others. There's some slight differences, but my Louisianas seem to lock up right out of the gate. My black pines might be a little bit later. And then my, when I did Floridas, they were a little bit later.
Okay.
But yeah, I'll do that. And then, another note just on the feeding piece while we're talking about it is after my females lay those big clutches, I go ahead, I try to offer something like that day or the very next day, something small.
Okay.
I try to get them feeding as quickly as possible because the clutches take so much out of the big girls.
Sure.
And so I get something small in them right away. And I have in the past offered like a small item like every other day after a female laid. Yeah. Over the course of a week to get her back on track. And they're different from year to year. But we can talk about that in just a minute if you want to, getting those females to recover, because that's a piece of the puzzle.
Sure thing. So kind of back to the earlier stages of the breeding process. Are you getting a shed before the pre-lay shed, or is it out of brumation, breeding, and then pre-lay shed?
I don't get a shed prior to very often. It's not like what I used to do with the corns and the kings where the shed would be the trigger to pair them.
Right.
It's not like that at all. One thing about the Pituophis, it seems like the shed takes a lot more out of the animal than it does for some of the thinner skinned colubrids. I think when they go into it, their shed cycles take longer. Sometimes they'll miss like 3 or 4 weeks of feeding because they go into that shed cycle. And it seems to take so long. It seems to take a lot out of the animals. So they don't shed very often compared to a lot of the other colubrids I've kept. And so I rarely get a shed before. I get that pre-lay shed, but I rarely get a shed right out of brumation before. I don't even pay any attention to that. I just start pairing right away. I think if I waited for that, I would miss my window.
Okay. Makes sense. So from out of brumation until the pre-lay shed, roughly how long is that period when you're pairing? You're doing that, you said 5 days on, 2 days off, kind of, I would assume up until that point, and then past that, like you said?
Yeah, I usually get, really, it's funny. Most years I'll get a clutch sometime around Mother's Day.
Okay.
And so you see how I use the holidays to kind of track. So sometime around mid-May, I'll usually get a clutch. So if they come up in March, it takes about that long for them. I guess it takes 45 days is my guess for them to be able to, produce and get to the point where they have that pre-lay shed and then lay. So I usually get a clutch. So this past year, I think things ran a little slower for whatever reason. Again, we don't really dictate to them. They kind of dictate to us. And I think that's a key for the keeper, is to understand that they're going to work on their schedule. You just give them what they need and try to pay attention. So this year, I think I had clutches early July, maybe, like really late. But of course, the July clutch is still going to hatch in September. So okay. So it just depends. But usually, most years, it'll be sometime in mid-May.
Okay. And then you're just pairing routinely up until that point, no matter what?
Yeah, I'm real specific. Like once I choose a pair for that year, I stick with that pair. I don't rotate my males at all. Some breeders like to rotate males to increase the chances of fertility, and I think that's great too. But I try to be real purposeful in my pairing that year. So it'll be the same pair for that entire year, and they will go 5 days together. I'll separate them. I'll feed the female. I may or may not even offer the male, because usually they don't, so I don't offer. But I'll feed the female real heavy. I'll give her 2 days break just to kind of digest that food before I put the male back, and then I'll put the male back for 5 more days. And so that cycle continues all the way through until she goes opaque. When she goes opaque, I separate them, and then as soon as she sheds, I reintroduce them. I don't usually see anything happen at that point, because most of the time it's already happened prior to that. But I do it just to be on the safe side. They ignore each other. I know there's nothing else that's going to happen. Oh, she's good. And I just kind of at that point, I just go ahead and feed her weekly until she stops eating, and they'll stop eating, usually once they've had the pre-lay shed, they may eat one more time, but at some point, they stop prior to laying. They're not interested anymore.
Okay. So how many days typically is it from pre-lay shed to them laying their clutch?
So my advice to all the breeders out there would be, don't count them, because you're going to drive yourself nuts. So, back in the day, I keep records on everything. I keep note cards, but, and you'll find that like one female will have a set, like she'll kind of follow a pattern, and you can predict when she's going to lay. But one thing I've learned I've done this for more than 2 decades now, is I don't think about it. I don't keep up with it. I give her that box when she goes opaque, and they use big nesting boxes. I use a 32 quart. Container with a hole melted in the top, full of sphagnum moss. I give them a really big nesting box. I don't have room to move around and get comfortable in there. They'll push the sphagnum up against the sides, and they'll make a really nice cavity in there. But yeah, I say don't count it, because you're going to worry yourself sick over it. You're going to think they're egg bound, and you're going to stress. So I say don't even think about it. Just give her what she needs, leave her alone, and try not to think about it, because we will stress. I'm sure you're the same way when you have snakes and you're waiting on the lay, and you're like, I'm counting the days. And I've learned over the years, just don't even count it. Just let them do their thing. Gosh, I don't even want to tell you what I think the average is, because I try not to think about it anymore. It decreases my stress, because if I'm more stressed, I'm afraid I'm going to transfer some of that stress to my animals too. And that's probably not good for them either. And so I just try to keep it as chill as possible, and I don't keep up with it on purpose.
That makes sense. Yeah, I'm a little scarred. A couple of years ago, I've said this on here a couple of times. I had 10 female scrub pythons lay, and 6 of them went egg bound.
Oh,
So I had just moved, and I have to imagine that had something to do with it, considering this
yeah,
year I didn't have any go egg
that's
bound.
good.
So,
That's good.
you know, but so yeah, so that's always something that my paranoia brain, not so
Yeah.
much with colubrids. I've never had a colubrid go egg, but well, actually,
Yeah.
I had a beauty snake hold an egg for like a day or two.
Yeah.
But that was really about it. So,
I've had a few over the years. In my earlier years of breeding, I had a California King go egg bound, and we've had a Western Hog go egg bound. I had one more. I think I had a Desert King go egg bound. So I've had it happen a handful of times earlier in my career, and I'm sure there's things that I wasn't doing right there in those days. One thing that seems to be connected to that is the hydration of the animal.
yeah.
And so when they're sitting in that nesting box, one thing I will do when I check on them in that nesting box is I will mist the snake with water while it's in the egg box, and it will drink the water off of its own scales while it's sitting in there.
Okay.
And so I'll do that every couple of days because they're not coming out of the egg box to go drink water. And so I do believe there's a correlation between, dehydration and being egg bound. And so I work really hard to keep my animals hydrated during that time, but with minimal stress. And so I do that with a little mister, and I mist them, and you'll see them, they'll drink it right off their bodies. And so that seems to make a difference. But
Interesting.
Cool. Yeah. And with these, I mean, these eggs are so massive. That's always a concern that they're going to get stuck, but I think that seems to help. That plus the regular exercise, getting them out, let them move in the yard a little bit is probably good for them too.
Okay. Very cool. Well, it's about that time. We're going to break for commercial real quick. When we get back, I want to talk some more about the eggs, incubation, and whatnot. But we're going to hit that commercial real quick. So sit tight, everybody. We will be back in a few minutes.
Sorry for the interruption, folks, but a quick word from our sponsors. Green tree pythons, emerald tree boas, and plenty other arboreal snakes have been quite the popularity here at the Trap Talk Reptile Network, which brings me to today's sponsor, the Reptile Perch. Head over to the reptileperch.com and Reptile Perch on Instagram. See what type of design PVC perch is best for your arboreal reptile. But first and foremost, I would also check out David Brom's Green Tree Python availability on the website. And you can also check out his Instagram just to stay current on any projects or any productions that he posts. Thank you so much, David Broms, for your ongoing support. Looking forward to seeing what you have to show in the 2025 season. When you think about building a good community and being a leader of that community, nobody comes to mind better than Mark Hager over at Texas Chondros. That's right. Make sure you head over to TX Chondros on Instagram and also head over to Mark's website. See what he has available Green Tree Python wise, and be ready for quite the 2025 Green Tree Python breeding season out of Mark Hager. He's a veteran in the Green Tree Python game, one of the best and nicest breeders in the Green Tree Python game. He's been putting on the whole state of Texas for as long as I've known him. So if you want to see all the amazing other chondro keepers out of the state of Texas, another good reason to go follow Mark Hager over at TX Chondros on Instagram. And again, head over to his website, texaschondros.com. You can find all the links in the description below. Thank you so much, Mark Hager, for supporting the Trap. Treat! One of the biggest growths we have in the reptile industry today are the rare species of reptiles that aren't worked with. That's right. That's why I went ahead and partnered up again with Brian Susan over at SUNDOWN Reptiles. Brian works with species such as kahua geckos, gargoyle geckos, all species of tree monitors. He works with abronia and many other cool species geckos that you can check out all on his website. Head over to sundownreptiles.com, see what he has available. Brian's one of the best doing it in the reptile industry today. He's been on the show multiple times, so make sure you check out all of Brian Susan's episodes on Trap Talk Reptile Network. But more importantly, for the highest quality of captive bred reptiles, make sure you head over to sundownreptiles.com and make sure you give him a follow on Instagram. Thank you again, Brian Susan over at Sundown Reptiles. One of the things I love about being a part of the reptile industry is all the learning, okay? Learning can be fun, and I can prove that to you. Thank you so much to today's sponsor, Gary Scavino over at gs.reptiles. I highly recommend you head over to his YouTube channel, follow all this man's content when it comes to learning about rare species of snakes you could be keeping in the hobby, and also just finding out how easy a lot of these rare species of snakes are to keep in general. So thank you so much, Gary Scavino of GS Reptiles. Again, head over to his YouTube channel. Also head over to his Instagram to be on top of all of his current work and be ready for a big year over at GS Reptiles. Thank you so much, Gary, for your ongoing support. I really appreciate it. Cheers. Sorry for the interruption, folks, but a quick word from our sponsors. You know, longevity is one of the biggest things I strive for when it comes to thinking about being a part of the reptile industry. That's why I'm very proud about today's sponsor, Mark Bailey over at Mark Bailey Reptiles. 40 plus years, full-time reptile keeper, enthusiast. This guy, you can catch all his amazing ball python projects on MORPH Market. So make sure you head over to MORPH Market, and that's Mark Bailey Reptiles on MORPH Market. See what he has available currently. And I gotta tell you one thing, he's one of the biggest and most respected ball python breeders we have today in the ball python game. So shout out to Mark Bailey over at Mark Bailey Reptiles. Thank you for all the support. And again, make sure you head over to his account on MORPH Market, see what he has available. Thank you so much, Mark Bailey over at Mark Bailey Reptiles. Cheers.
Alrighty, we are back. All right, so once you're at the point where you have the gravid females, they're laying their clutches, how are you setting up their boxes for incubation?
So I use sphagnum moss. One of the interesting things is a lot of times they'll dig out those nice nesting chambers, and they will lay the eggs more vertically. And the eggs, of course, they'll stick together. So the eggs stick together vertically. I can't separate them, so I have to set them up in the box with really deep sphagnum moss and put the eggs vertically. I have never had problems with that in the past. I put them in a box. I put a couple air holes, nothing like what I would in their tubs because I need to keep the humidity up. But I like to have some airflow. Okay. I've never had problems in the past, but this year I actually lost a couple eggs from the bottom of those. And so one thing I'm going to try to do a little differently next year is I'm going to put a couple straws in there that allow some oxygen flow from the bottom of that stack up. It's the first year I've ever lost any. So I was like, I'm going to try something new there to get some airflow down to the bottom. I see these folks who have, they'll wait for the snake to lay and they take each egg out individually, and you see these really nice little nesting boxes with all the eggs arranged. I'm afraid I'm going to stress the female out while she's laying.
Yeah, I would be too.
You know what I mean? If I'm going in and messing with her. So I try to let her do her thing. And so by the time I go in there, I got this huge cluster of eggs that are vertically oriented. And I have to find a way to fit all these giant eggs into a box, into an egg box. And so, but that's one thing I learned this year. We're always trying to perfect what we do. And so to get oxygen down to the bottom, I'm going to try that this year. My hatch rates are always really good, but I did lose a couple eggs this year that way. But I do sphagnum, and then moss, like the heavier peat, and then over the top I'll use the strand sphagnum over the top of them. One thing to note with these big eggs, that sometimes the top eggs in the box will kind of harden a little bit, and I'll notice that my eggs from below will pip and my snakes will come out, but the eggs on top sometimes don't pip. And I think the egg hardens because of some of the airflow in the incubator.
Okay.
I use an incubator that was built by my friend Chris at Gorgon's Head. And so sometimes I think just the airflow kind of does that. So one of the things I've started doing the last couple of years also that seems to work well is 24 hours from the first ones that pip, I will slit any of the ones on top that have not already pipped.
Okay.
I never did that as a practice before because I tried it early in my career. And it was one of those things about counting days, like we talked about a few minutes ago. I was counting days, like these things have been incubated a long time. I'm going to slit them. And it was rat snake eggs. They crawled out and died. And I was like, oh man, I screwed that one up. Yeah. So I don't do that until the other ones have pipped and started to come out. And then 24 hours later, I'm like, okay, I'm going to slit these top ones. And that seems to work well. I get healthy animals come out that way. But I do think that because the eggs are so big and so thick, that I do think some of them kind of harden over on top. I have to slit those, if they don't pip. So that's one thing I do with those. I incubate them in an incubator. Usually set my temps between 80 and 82 in my incubator. They usually hatch in 66 days. Okay. For black pines and Louisianas is about the same.
Okay. Very cool. Very cool. All right. And then, like you were saying earlier, once they're pipping, you just kind of let them be until they've all had their first sheds?
Yeah, I leave them in the box. I take the whole box, and I use like a shoe box for most of them. Some of the clutches are bigger, and I've got bigger nesting box I can use for those. But yeah, I just leave them once they're out. I leave them in the case. I put them over in the tub, crack it, and I just leave them until they've all shed. Then I separate them out. They tend to hatch with a lot of yolk. Some of the babies are massive. A lot of my Louisianas are over 100 grams when they hatch.
That's crazy.
Yeah, they're huge babies. Like they hatch out big enough to eat small mice.
Wow.
But I usually start them on rat pinks. But I've got some here now that have already graduated to small mice. They're massive babies. But yeah, so I they go from the nesting box to the newspaper with the little paper hide and the individual cages and whatnot. They kind of kick things off from there. They're easy to start. Like I said, I've done lots of different milks and Scarlet Kings and Mole Kings that were such a pain to start. And these guys are just a joy to work with out of the egg because they're so big. And you never get used to how big a baby Louisiana pine snake is. Like, I've been doing it for years now, and every year I'm blown away by how big they are. And another thing that people don't tell you about Louisianas is there's a lot of variability in terms of the color and the appearance of these eggs. It's actually really kind of neat. Like I'll hatch out, a lot of them have like a cream or yellow ground color is more the normal, like more of a cream ground color. But I've seen some that were yellow, some that were orange, some that were reddish. I have some that are white.
Wow.
So that's a thing I would caution folks is you hear folks are real quick to get on like public forums and say, oh, those aren't pure Louisiana. Those are this or those are that. And, and I don't really feed into a lot of that I understand that stuff happened back in the 90s. But you go back, Roger Cotton had put out a paper back in 1956, and he was describing Louisiana pines and black pines, and he was talking about the difference between the Louisianas and the bull snakes. And that was 40 years before any of the controversy about people mixing Louisiana pines with other species or whatnot. And he was real clear about what constitutes a Louisiana pine snake. And so I've had folks go and say, well, they've got a lateral neck stripe, or they've got a stripe between the eyes. That's not a Louisiana pine. You can read some of Content stuff, and he'll tell you those are all characteristics of Louisiana pines. I mean, some have it, some don't. Most of them have the spots on the head, but some have the stripes. And so you really, I think, to know what you have, I think it has to do with hatchling size. It has to do with tracing your lineage and talking to people. It has to do with the head shape, the shape of the animals. They're short and stocky compared to your bulls and your northern. They're very different animals. The only animal I know of in North America that really compares to them in terms of their body shape is Simus. That's what they look like. They look like a giant Simus.
Okay.
They're short and fat. And I'll get one out. What's that?
So it's a good way to put it.
Yeah, it's the best way to, you know what you've got. Once you've seen them and you've held them, you know what they are. And the head shape is really unique. They've got this short, blocky little head, and they're just unique. They're very unique. Like, you can't mistake what you have. But it's frustrating to hear folks on a public forum sometime come in and say, oh, it's got this, so it's not that. And it's like, I don't have a lot of tolerance for that with a lot of those folks. I don't deal with a lot of those folks because they don't know, and they don't approach things with a willingness to want to learn. And that's kind of frustrating sometimes.
Sure.
So, I say if a guy's on a public forum and he's absolutely like adamant about something not being a Louisiana pine, call him up and have a 15-minute conversation with him.
Yeah.
And when you got him on the phone for 15 minutes and you talk to him, ask yourself, like, is this a guy that I would trust to give me advice on something like this? Or is this a guy I would let watch my kids? And then you make that decision on that person's judgment on those animals based on that conversation with that individual. And I've done that with a few of those folks, and I don't deal with those folks anymore.
Yeah. That's why I love to do these podcasts, because you can't bullshit your way through a 2-hour conversation.
Exactly.
Like if someone's on here who's, first of all, I only interview people who I want to talk to, but if there was somebody, and I've had it before in the past where, 90 minutes in, you're like, this person is full of shit, and everyone can see it. So get out from behind the keyboard. And obviously this isn't in person, but it's as close as you're going to get in the days and age of the internet. So that's why I love this forum. It's like, people who are in the live comments, that's all positivity. And then, you can't you can't hide behind your screen name and your avatar picture. You know, this is as real as it gets. So
I love that, man. That's a good thing. In this day and age, that's a really good thing. The world needs more of that.
yeah,
For sure.
I totally agree. So you were saying you were going to do a little show and tell for us
Yeah,
here.
yeah. Let me grab one here. I'm going to grab a Louisiana for you guys just to kind of show you, because that's where. Let's see. All right. So this girl is this one was bred by Dr. Jacques Meeker. This is the animal that made me fall in love with Louisianas.
All right.
It's one of her parents was a Theron Majors F1, and the other parent was an Eric Richter animal, which we assume is like an F4. Because, you know, those are older animals that came from Terry Vanderveer years ago.
Okay.
And so it's a great example of a Louisiana pine. So I'll show you kind of what you're looking at. It's a big snake. All right. And so I'll try to get her there where you can get a good enough look at how big she is. You can see she's almost, there you go. She's almost a black and white. You see that short, stocky head with all the head spots? Let's see. I'll get her close so you guys can kind of see her. That short, stocky head. And she's, you know, she's almost black and white. But she's a big girl. She weighs about 2,600 plus grams. She's the one that lays the eggs that has all the 100-gram plus offspring. You can see she's pretty chill. She's big. She's about 5.5 feet long, and she's massive. You can see she's about as big as my forearm. And I'm not a small guy. So yeah, she's a big girl. I don't know if you guys. There you go. So one of the telltale characteristics of the Louisianas is they look like two snakes. The front half is kind of messy. You can see the blotches are indistinct, and they kind of run together. And then the back half is a little more crisp and clear. You can kind of see that with her. All right. So, and she's easy to deal with. She's pretty well behaved. But yeah, so this is a Louisiana, a big Louisiana pine.
Yeah, she is gorgeous.
Thank you. She's a good animal. They don't get terribly long. Like I said, she's maybe 5.5 feet long, but she's a massive animal. So I think she's a good spokesperson for the species.
For sure.
So she's a lot to handle on the podcast. So I'm gonna put her back in her bag.
Right.
But yeah, she's a big girl. If you notice, I'll get her up here close enough you can see her head again.
Yeah,
she does have a little bit of a stripe between her eyes. You guys see that? So people will tell you, oh, Louisianas don't have that. Some of them do. And you can look back at the Roger Contant stuff from 1956. And as you read that paper that was written about the pine snakes back then, he'll tell you that I think 2/3 of the Louisianas would have that stripe between the eyes.
Okay.
So it's not an uncommon thing.
So why would that have even become a thing for people to say, oh, the Louisianas don't have that stripe between the eyes?
You know, I'm going to tell you, man, I think there are people in the trade who, I guess, have rivalries with other people.
Yeah, that's for sure.
And they take shots at other people.
Yeah.
And so they just want to discredit other folks. And
fair enough.
You know, and I've managed to avoid a lot of that with people. I just don't deal with people that are not in it for the same reason I am.
Yeah.
So I managed to avoid a lot of that. But I think that's a lot of it. I think people just have rivalries with others, and they either get jealous of what other people have, or somebody insults somebody else, so they're just more invested in insulting the other person than they are in the well-being of the animals and the future of the animals. And so, like I said, my goal is the future of the animals. I want to have good, solid stock that's very diverse that I can keep moving on with. I don't pay my rent with my snakes. I don't pay my mortgage. I actually have a mortgage. I don't pay my mortgage with my snakes. I do it because I love them. And I love getting them out to people, and I enjoy this type of interaction with people. Mm-hmm. I've loved snakes since I was a kid, and so I'm not, you know, I try to stay away from a lot of those other kind of. I'm not a commercial breeder. Yeah. I don't get involved in rivalries with people around animals, and to be honest with you, I don't really work with the types of animals that a lot of, you know, I stay away from. I don't do ball pythons or the big commercial type of animals. I stay out of all that. You know,
Yeah.
I like these guys. This suits me just great. So I just avoid a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, I feel like the community is almost half of the enjoyment of the animal. Like I've been involved with species in the past where there was just so much negativity in the community that it's kind of sucks to say this, but it kind of turned me off from working with those animals because I'm like, man, I might enjoy them myself, but then I don't even want to talk to anybody who also works with these animals. Like, for me, that's a lot of the fun are those friendships.
And I got to tell you, man, with pits, like the people that work with pits, they're certain they're good people, man. I'm telling you, especially the ones that kind of like these old school guys that have these pines for 20 something years. Like they're amazing people to sit and chat with. They're doing it for the right reasons. Because if you go back 15, 20 years ago, Pituophis didn't bring in a whole lot of money for the amount of work, what it takes to feed them and keep up with them and all that.
Yeah,
they're not really a big commercial animal.
Sure.
So you get a certain kind of guy when you work with pits, a guy that just loves big, pretty snakes that are fun to keep and always eat. And every once in a while you get one that's a little spicy and it'll fuss at you and they're fun too. I didn't bring one of those down today. I was afraid I'd scare people away, but I have a few of those.
Yeah.
I have a black pine here. I'll show you guys too if you want to see that one next.
Let's do it.
And so this is one of my males. This is an Eric Richter male. I keep my males a little smaller, like I said before, because I want them to be good breeders. But he's not small by any means. He's just not a beast like that last snake I pulled out. But you can kind of see, and he's glossy, black top and bottom. And so he's a beautiful snake. He's maybe 5.5 feet long, a little smaller than my female. Again, I feed my males a little less than my girls, but you can see he's not really hurting in terms of his body weight. I just don't want him to be overweight because I feel like he won't be as good of a breeder if he's overweight. But yeah, he's, like I said, solid black top to bottom. He's proven a couple years in a row. So this is the sire to a lot of my offspring that I'm offering this year and last year. I have a couple of other lines of these guys. You can see he's a little bit easier to handle than the Louisiana. I don't know if you noticed that. He's not fighting quite as much as she was. Yeah. These guys are a little more chill. I would say if somebody has not kept pits, this is the one I would recommend. They're pretty laid back and easy to handle. Some of the babies are a little bit fussy in terms of hissing or whatnot, but that settles down pretty quickly, and they get to be pretty easy to handle. But you can see he's a pretty big guy. Yeah. I have 4 different lines of black pines. I have this guy who's an Eric Richter animal. I've got a female that's a Cincinnati Zoo bred to a Washington Zoo animal. Or National Zoo. Washington Zoo is National Zoo. And I have a Kentucky Reptile Zoo, and I have Kevin Inge stock. So I have 4 different lines of black pines also. Okay. I've kind of worked hard to secure different lines. I have several different lines of Louisianas, and I have 4 different lines of black pines. Okay. And so again, it's just making an effort to try to keep it as diverse as possible. Yeah. You can see beautiful, solid black. I've bred black milks. I've kept Mexican black kings. Nothing compares to these guys. Yeah. I'll just, I know people are into black milks, and I love black milks. They're great snakes, but this is an amazing animal. It really is. If you're on the fence between the two, I would highly recommend you to look at these guys because they're just awesome.
I feel the same exact way. That's what I say. People like the shiny black colubrids and Mexican black kings get most of the hype, and then people like black milks. But I'm like, man, I mean, an Eastern Indigo is an Eastern Indigo, but that's an undertaking most people can't quite actually keep up with. But a black pine is, I think, like the perfect option for that.
I totally agree. Yeah, my wife won't let me keep Eastern Indigos or any of the Indigos because of the mess. That's on my band. That's on my band snake list. But these guys they're not bad. They're bigger, so they make a little more mess than the black milks do. But they're bigger than the black milks and way bigger than the Mexican black kings. And I'm not knocking either of those species. I think those guys are really great to keep. I've bred black milks I've kept Mexican black Pekins, but I've not bred them. I bred some Arizona locality Splendida that the female, it was kind of on that edge of the range between the two, and the female was had a lot of those traits. But
cool.
But yeah, this is just a whole different, like in terms of the size of this snake compared to those snakes, it's just really different.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not pushing this guy. He gets, I try to keep him lean and mean, and he's still that big. If I tried to make him big, he'd be massive, but it wouldn't accomplish the goals that I'm setting out to accomplish, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. So you kind of half answered the next question I had queued up, which was the number of different lineages of both. That you have 4 distinctive lineages of black pine. So how many of Louisiana's do you have?
Oh, let's see. I've got a trio that I got from Terry V. I've got Theron Majors. I've got KJ Lodridge. I've got John Ginter stock. I've got Mark LaChain stock, which is old Terry V stock, but Mark did a good job with it. Like, those are really nice snakes. Those LaChain animals are really nice. And I have a Vernon Parrish animal. That's a Vernon Parrish animal. I think a Vernon Parrish F1 or F2 bred to a Ginter F2. And so that Vernon Parrish it's a different look. It's a little more orange. It's beautiful. It's pure Louisiana. It's just beautiful. It's just different. And so I've got all those different lines, and I've been real fortunate to have different people over the years contact me and have different relationships with different folks. I've been able to get my hands on different animals. I was able to get an F1 John Ginter animal a few years back that I was able to use for some of my breeding stock, and held back some stuff from that, and just been really fortunate to be able to find really nice Louisianas that were really close to wild caught. And on that note, I would be really cautious when you're looking at, particularly, you don't see it as much as Louisiana pines. One thing about the federal permit process, we can talk about in a few minutes, is I think that turns off a lot of folks who are wanting to make a quick dollar and move snakes quickly. So I think it's a good thing. Yeah. But with your animals that are not yet protected, your Florida pines, for years your black pines, you have to be real careful, because folks trying to make an extra dollar will tell you they've got something that's F1, knowing that, you want to get close to it, and they don't. Like, I had a good example. I had a couple of my black pines a couple years ago. I sold to a guy here in North Carolina, so it didn't require a permit. And 6 months later, I saw the same guy post the same snakes on Fauna, and he said they were unrelated F2s. Now, I sold him those snakes, and they were great snakes, but they were a sibling pair, and they were not F2, because black pines have been protected since the 70s. Nobody's got F2s.
Yeah.
And so, when I see that, I'm never going to deal with that guy again. I block him. I'm done with him. But you got to be cautious about kind of stuff like that. I've ran into a similar situation with Florida pines before. I raised up a pair of Floridas, and I bred them, and they were supposed to be F1 bred to F1, and unrelated F1 bred to unrelated F1. And then when I bred them, I got to another animal. I got leucistic and patternless animals out of that group. And so I was like, and the thing is the buyer may have just trusted the people that told them, but the people, the people that sold them to them, if they're just trying to make a dollar, you don't, they'll tell you. So I hear that a lot. I saw that with some Aikens. I've worked with Aiken, South Carolina pines over the years, and I have a friend who has a wild caught Aiken and an F2 Aiken. And so that's really close, and it's a legally collected wild caught. It's like a 15 year old snake or whatever, when they were still legal to collect in South Carolina. But so I know there are legit ones out there, but I've seen other folks claim F1 on the Aikens from different places, and I know where they got them from, and they weren't F1s, and so they were producing offspring. They were getting F2s and producing offspring. So at best they had F3s. But people do that. You got to be careful about that. And so I think it's just knowing your folks. And then one thing I'll do is, I'll talk to the person I'm getting the animal from, but then I'll say, where'd you get it? And I'll go to that person, and I'll say, where'd you get it? And I just keep doing that work. And I think that I can't emphasize that enough. That's a real key when you're looking at these limited gene pools, is doing that work. Trace it back as far as you can. Keep your animals, take good care of them, keep them as long as you can, because what you really want, you want these guys to be producing in 20 years.
Yeah.
And so I think those are keys to working with these guys.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. On that note, do you know of any longevity records of breeding within pine snakes?
I've got friends who've had pine snakes that are 30 plus years old that are still producing.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So they've lived. They're very long. You think about what they are. Like they're a big apex predator that lives in the longleaf, and they live underground. So there's not a whole lot of animals that were native that were going to get to them. So they live a long time, and they produce very few, very large offspring. And so, I think they're built, as long as there's not a lot of inbreeding, they're built to. But we've introduced wild hogs, which have caused problems. We've destroyed their habitat. We suppress fire. We build roads, which they're too big and slow to get across roads. Yeah, we've done all these things to alter that for them, but they weren't built for that. That's why they struggle so much with what we're doing to alter their habitat, because they're built to live a long time and produce very few offspring.
Sure. Yeah.
So I know multiple. I know Rusty Rollins has had 30-plus-year-old animals still produce. I think Jay has had some older animals still produce.
Yeah.
So I know multiple people that have had really, really old pine snakes still producing.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it's awesome. And so I think that's a key to this long term, is keeping your animals around a long time. And
because that's not what you'd expect from a colubrid. You'd think colubrids kind of turn and burn, produce young, produce a lot, burn out, and that's what they do. Yeah. But completely different mindset.
Yeah, I think so. I think you have to approach it. And then these guys, if you go into it thinking, okay, 4 or 5 years before their first clutch. Yeah. And then, another thing I worked really hard on is trying to figure out how to get them to take a year off. And so I reached out to lots of different folks, Jennifer Joseph, Rusty, Meeker, a lot of the folks I know. Tony Dongera has been another mentor for me. Reached out to all these folks. Reached out to Jay, asked him for advice. Jerry Salmon, reached out to him for advice. A lot of these different folks, and it's just like, how do I get them to take a year off? Because I want the longevity of the animal. I don't want to produce tons of offspring. I want longevity. But the tricky thing with them is that if you don't pair them and they produce slugs, I'm worried about the slugs getting stuck and losing my animal. And so that's where I've been stuck with trying to figure out how to give them years off. And so if anybody's got suggestions on that, please, message me. I'm open to hearing. I bounce it off everybody I know. And the place I landed, Tony really gave me a lot of great advice on that. And he's like, you just feed them and they do what they want to do. You can't dictate that. They will. And I think that's probably the best advice I've gotten. But I think that's the real thing. Everybody I've talked to runs to the same issue. It's like, how do you get them to take a year off? Sometimes they just do it on their own, but you don't want to risk, because I guess slugs are harder to pass than fertile eggs, and so you don't want to risk them getting egg bound with slugs.
Sure, that's just it's so funny as a primarily a Python guy to think of anyone asking, how do I get my female to not breed? It's like the opposite of what we think. It's like, my female hasn't gone in 3 years. What the heck am I doing wrong?
Yeah, well, they get in this zone, man, and that's all they want to do. And I had one a few years ago. Tony and I have done some breeding projects together, and I had one a few years ago, and she tried to double clutch, and her second clutch was all infertile, and she really struggled. I thought we were going to lose her the next spring, and so we went back and forth, like, what do we do with her? She just sat on her heat for a month, wouldn't eat, wouldn't do anything. Yeah. Tony gave me some really good advice. He said, take her water dish away for a week and then offer her like a little fuzzy mouse. And I did, and she took it. And then, I did that again, a few days later. And then before I knew it, she was back up to rats. And I had to sprinkle a little vitamin powder on top of them, and she ovulated. I paired her. She laid another set of eggs. It was just like, she bounced back so quickly at that point. Yeah. But you know, you just the eggs are so big, it takes a lot of the females. It's really, really hard on the females when they lay. And so when you look at them after they lay, you wonder, like, how are they going to bounce back? And so in some years you can see some years they bounce back better than others, and you know, but it's tough on them.
Percentage wise, how much of their mass will they lose with that event of laying the eggs?
Gosh, you know, it's a really great question. I should probably weigh them while they're gravid and then after they lay and find out. I'll try to do that next spring, and I'll shoot you a message and let you know. Cool. I hate to guess at that, but it's a lot. I mean, if you think, you know, they're going to hatch out, let's say a Louisiana hatches out 5 100-gram hatchlings. You know, that's 500 grams, not counting any kind of fluid or anything that might be in that egg. Yeah. And that snake's 2,500 grams. You know, that's 20%. Of their body weight right there, but you know, that's 2,500 grams before they ovulate. Sure. So with all those eggs, they probably weigh, you know, you're probably looking at a snake that's, you know, 8 or 9 pounds when it's fully gravid. That's a big snake for a snake that's like 5.5 feet long. That's a monster.
Yeah, it's a dense.
You imagine what that looks like. Like, it's huge.
Yeah, oh, that's so cool.
But yeah, they're really good. They're awesome. They're lovely animals. They really are.
Yeah. No question. Yeah, I have a pair of black pines, but I don't have any Louisianas at the moment. They're on the short list of what I still need to add. Nice. They're amazing.
Well, we should talk next year. I should have 3 females go next year for me. I have 3, okay. And so we should have a conversation between now and next year.
No doubt.
If that's something we want to do.
Absolutely. I do have a question, kind of coming back to something you kind of touched on earlier, of the different phenotypes within the Louisiana pines. So will you get different phenotypes within a clutch, or is it more just some of the different lineages just naturally have different phenotypes?
Both. So, you know, some of the lineages will tend towards more yellow or more orange, or just more cream. Cream is probably right, but you'll see. But even within a clutch, you'll have some variety within the clutch. You'll have some come out with a little more orange, and, you know, the vast majority of them are going to come out with that, you know, like a cream with a real dark brown blotches for the majority. And then you'll get an oddball out of each clutch, an oddball or 2 out of each clutch. And so one of the things I've done, I've tried to hold on to some of the ones that had more remarkable colors. Yeah. To at some point down the road, try to selectively breed those. And again, it's not a race, so it'll be years, but I have started to kind of think about that and grabbing, you know, some of the ones that come out with a little more orange or a little more yellow, to try to do some pairings down the road to see if I can produce more like that. And that'll be kind of fun. But again, they're so slow to mature, and, you know, we're talking about a 5 or 10 year project there, you know, so you just have to look forward to.
I feel like if you can combine, you know, strong lineages with selective breeding and not necessarily compromise the first for the second, I mean, that's, what more could you ask for?
Yeah, exactly. And I'm telling you, man, some of these guys come out and they're, especially like the ones that are like, have really black blotches and really yellow black backgrounds. Man, they rival those Kentucky pines. Like, they're stunning snakes. I mean, if you ask me, and I know I'm biased because I love these guys, but I'll tell you, man, I think they're the prettiest of all the pines. I really do. Like, they're phenomenal, but some of them are shocking. They're so pretty with the yellow and black, and it's just really nice.
Yeah, I think Jay just posted a Louisiana. He has, I'm not sure if it was from you or not, the other day, that literally had that same Kentucky pine yellow.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, whoa.
Yeah, he's got some great stuff. No, he doesn't have any for me. He's going, I mean, I guess we have some related lines that we have, but yeah, he's got some really nice ones. I think I saw the one that you're talking about that was just beautiful. And it, like I said, it really rivals the best Kentuckys that you see. Like, it really truly does. And then, you know, for my taste, one that has that color scheme and then is shorter and stockier and has like this Rottweiler head. I just think that's just like the perfect snake for me. I think they're just amazing, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. No, they're amazing. I like I said, we definitely have to talk. So, but I kind of on that subject, we talked about it beforehand, and Steve commented almost instantly to talk about this. I'm like, you are about an hour and a half ahead of me, my guy. But the interstate commerce portion of this because they are ESA listed, so they
Mhm.
are regulated for interstate commerce. So how is that? How is it going about that process?
Okay, so of course, right now there's federal shutdown, so it's at a complete standstill right
Yeah.
now. So I have buyers who have permits in that are waiting on the feds to kind of open back up. But
Yeah.
I have a good relationship with U.S. Fish and Wildlife, with the folks that work in those offices. Communicate with those folks regularly because I'm always asking questions like, "Hey, what about this? What about that?" And
Mhm.
just to making sure that everything I'm doing is within the lines. And then I have buyers who are always asking me questions as well, so I go back and kind of ask those questions. But basically, what I do is um, when I get a list of what I call an inquiry list, folks who want to potentially buy from me, and I can just give them updates when the snakes lay, and then a week or two before the eggs are due, I send out what I call a cheat sheet, which is just like supporting information so that they can prepare their documentation for that permit. It just gives them information on how to, because it's federal documentation. There's something else in my day job. I do a lot of federal reporting and different things like that too. I work in government, and so I'm comfortable with all that anyway. But I send them out the list. It kind of helps walk them through the how to complete their permits and different things like that. What they need to make sure they include. They have to do a sketch of what their snake room looks like, how they're going to house those animals. I have to do a breeder letter for them, and so I get them all that stuff ahead of time. And then because they can't submit until the snakes hatch. Once so the day the snakes hatch, I send out pictures to all my potential buyers, say the snakes are hatched. Let me know when you're ready for a breeder letter. And I really emphasize the timeliness of that with my folks. I don't like it when folks drag their feet on that because the permit's going to take time. So, and we're also working against the winter temperatures as well.
Right.
So I try to get that all done enough so that I can start sending stuff out before it gets too cold to ship, if possible. And if not, it's no biggie. I just ship them out in the spring. But so anyway, they submit all their materials. A lot of folks are doing e-permits right now online. I did an e-permit recently to get the animals I got from Terry Vandeventer.
Okay.
And it's not a bad process, but it's all the same questions. You just do it all online. It costs $100. You pay it to U.S. Fish and Wildlife. And it takes about 60 days typically. Right now it's taking longer because of federal shutdown. So they're all kind of at a standstill. And so buyer submits that. When the buyer submits that, to me, that's your deposit. So I'm not asking you for a deposit on animal. You show me that you submitted your permit, then we're good. I'm going to hold those animals for you. And then I start a dialogue with the buyer throughout the process because it's a long wait. And I want to make sure that I kind of help them through that wait process. And so if they'll message me and ask questions, I'll say, hey, you want me to send you some updated pictures? I try to let them, if I can, let them pick their animals so they have theirs identified. So in my rack, each tub will have a sticker and it'll kind of identify the lineage of the animal, what the pairing was, if it's a male or a female, how many meals it's had, what it's eating, and then the name of the buyer. And so that buyer has their snake identified. They've selected it through the pictures, and I try to do that as much as I can. Some folks are, don't need that. They're like, I just whatever. And the people who submit their permits first are going to have priority, and so they get first pick because it's a process. It takes time, and I need folks to work with me on the timeline on that. And so that's usually how it works. It's usually 60 days. It might go 90 with this. Shutdown, it's probably going to take a little longer this year than usual. And I appreciate my folks being as patient as they are with me, but I just try to be really responsive as they ask questions. I send them stuff back and forth to help them through that process. And some people like more contact than others, that sort of thing. But but yeah, it's a smooth process. I'm 100% on permits. I think I've been doing it for about 4 years now.
Okay.
I get them all approved. I don't, they ask for additional information. Like they want to know, they'll ask, and it's legit, They'll ask different things. Every situation is different, but I help the buyer through it all, so they're not doing it by themselves. And like I said, I'm comfortable with and experienced with it, and so I get them through it. And like even to the point where I've made educational PowerPoints, and I share it with my buyers. If they're planning on doing education with them, they've got a PowerPoint already in hand they can take with them when they do education.
That's really nice.
So I try to really support them through. It's part of the process. If you're going to work with these animals and you're going to try to sell them across state lines, you kind of accept the fact that I'm going to be doing permits. Permits are not a bad thing. They reduce impulse buyers, which is good for the animals. You don't have somebody that goes to a show and picks up something because it looked cool, and then they get rid of the next week or whatever. You have folks who are really committed, because if if you're literally waiting for these animals from May or June when the eggs hatch until potentially the following March or April when I can ship them to you, if you got your permit in late, or like this year, if it takes longer because of the process, you're waiting almost a year on your animals from me. And so you're committed. By then, it's like, these aren't animals that you're going to throw away.
Sure. Yeah. No
and I think, so for me, when I'm looking at how special these guys are, I think it's good for them. It's good for the animals.
Yeah, no doubt.
So yeah, and so I'll help folks through that process, and I have all the documentation to support that and help them do that. I've got a good track record, good reputation. Like I said, I work in government, so I don't have any leeway to skirt around the process. I can't have anything like that, on my end. So I work with folks, and we make it happen. It's a good thing. Nice. I discount my animals a little bit. I look at whatever they're going for online, and I try to knock off a little bit to save the buyer the cost. Basically, I try to absorb some of the cost of the permit for the buyer to make it a little bit easier there too. So
it's definitely nice.
Yeah, and like I said, it's not like I don't pay my bills with my snakes. I buy rats and cages, and I do something nice for my wife once in a while so she doesn't complain too much about the snakes.
Yeah, no question. So is this just the standard CBW permit?
It's a interstate commerce permit. And it's when you go on the website, there's going to be this whole variety of different permits you have to choose from. And so you're looking, if anybody's ever on there, they can message me. I'll send them a link.
Okay.
You can find me on Facebook and shoot me a private message, and I'll send you a link, and it'll kind of help you identify, because there's a list of permits. You want to make sure you get the right one, but it's interstate commerce permit for native wildlife.
And is it one per animal?
Oh, great question. No, one permit covers whatever animals you want. And so
that's nice.
Yeah, it's really cool, because if you want not just a pair of Louisianas, but if somebody wants a pair of Louisianas and a pair of black pines, you can get all that on one permit.
Oh.
So $100 can get you a pair of both. And so one of the things I'm doing with the additional black pines is I can already, most years, if everything goes well, I can offer unrelated Louisianas. In a couple years, I'll be able also to offer unrelated black pines. And so part of the goal is to be able to have buyers come in and say, I want a pair of unrelated Louisianas, I want a pair of unrelated black pines, and then I can help them do one permit, and they can get that. And especially to states that some states don't have those animals.
Yeah, not at all.
Captive and private collections. And so, to be able to do that and get those out of those states is kind of one of my goals too. Do that.
Very nice. Are you often finding buyers in state, or is it almost exclusively out of state?
I get both. Maybe 25% of my buyers are in state and 75 are out of state, something like that. Keep in mind, I've been doing this for a while, so I've already sold to a lot of folks in state, and their animals are starting to get up to the point where they'll be producing in the next year or two, and so I imagine they'll do more in state. And I don't do reptile shows. I don't I don't vend at reptile shows.
Yeah, there'd be no point.
Well, I keep such a small collection, and I sell out every year, so I don't have. So I think there'll be a market for folks within the state who do reptile shows that'll do really well.
Sure.
Because those just aren't animals that you see. Like, I do a cookout here every year, and I have since 2017 at my house for breeders in the Southeast. And I invite folks out, and my wife and I prepare a bunch of food, and they bring their snakes in the fall, and they swap and sell. And, some of the guys will make racks and bring them in. We do raffles and different things like that. So I do that. I do that every year for the folks here.
Okay.
And this year we had some folks come in and say, hey, you had more Pituophis at your house this year than what we saw available at Daytona. And so those are the kind of guys that end up coming here, for those kind of things. And so, so there's a market. I think there's a market. The shows don't have a lot of pits.
And especially not those pits. They got bull snake morphs.
That's right. You see a lot of bulls now, but you don't see a lot of this kind of stuff. And so I think there's definitely a market if someone wants to do shows like what Jay does in Pennsylvania. I think there's a market for that in other states, because those you don't see those animals available.
And even if there isn't a market, man, do 3 or 4 shows and you probably are going to make one because,
Yeah.
I mean, if you're strolling through a reptile show, seeing what we see at every reptile show, and then all of a sudden you come across a table with, black pines and Louisiana pines, or, northern pines, Floridas, and even make it better. I've never done it personally. I don't do a lot of shows, but the breeders who will bring one of the adults with them, like the dad, and someone's like, oh, that is that.
Yeah.
And then mind blown immediately. And now, boom, you've created an entire market because you stood out at your show. You displayed your animals well. You educated, people about them, and then off to the races.
Yeah. If you get a chance, like if you go to Daytona and you check out Tony's table, Tony Dungara's, Tony D Reptiles, man, he really puts these displays out for all his stuff. And like, he puts a lot of love into his animals. And so, if somebody did that amount of work to display these type of animals, I think it would just blow people away.
Yeah.
I'm not like I said, my day job's very demanding, and it's nice because it takes the pressure off me with all the other stuff. This is all just fun for me. It's I can just kind of follow a passion. But if you had someone who really wanted to put that effort into it, it could be something really special for the animal and really get them out to people. Because you just don't see them that often.
No, definitely not. And, that for me, that was part of, I don't want to say it was part of me kind of diving deeper into the pits. One, I absolutely love them. They're some of my favorite snakes, but then also a lot of what I keep, I don't really feel comfortable putting in the hands of a newer keeper. Where a lot of the times I'm like, I'm vetting people to make sure that they have experience, that they've worked with, let's say if it's a scrub python, they have experience with carpet pythons or retics or something that's somewhat similar, to where it's not like, oh, I have a few crested geckos and now I want a 10-foot scrub python. It's like, you might want to work your way up to that. But in a lot of instances with Pituophis, and especially with some of the stuff like, the Jani, I feel comfortable putting that in the hands of a new keeper as their first pet. Absolutely. And especially if that's somebody who is going to keep in touch with me, ask questions, not be afraid of being a newbie. Like, to me, that's perfect. I'm not putting a tiger rat snake in that kid's hands who's never had a snake before. So it's another reason why I love pit so much, is that it's a super fun snake to keep. It's a snake that a super experienced keeper would love, and also a snake that'd be great for someone who's brand new.
I totally agree. Completely agree. And so they're wonderful.
Yeah, and like, there were definitely some at Daytona, but as far as, I give credit, Craig Trumbauer had a pair of the Kentuckys there. Rob Nimmo had some Kentuckys, some Louisiana. So there were some, there were some top tier pits there, but, then there were just like, there were some tables that had more than likely locality mixed northern pines, like 5 in 1 container. And then, not to knock the bull snake MORPH, but for the most part, those just aren't really what get my attention. He had a handful of those out there. But like, aside from those 2 guys who I just mentioned, there weren't many like, show stealing pits at that show. And that's
Rob,
a favorite show.
Yeah, Rob's got some really nice Louisiana. I've worked together on some stuff with Louisianas in the past, and he does a really great job, and he's a really great guy to work with.
They were gorgeous. They were wonderful.
Yeah, he's got some really nice animals.
Yep, absolutely. Well, we're kind of winding down here towards the end. Were there any topics that I know we had, we talked about some stuff that you prepared, anything that we haven't hit on that you want to touch on before we wrap here?
I think we covered everything, Stephen. I think you did a great job, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, conversations like this are what I live for in this industry. It's why I do this show. I love just going deep dive into every little nook and cranny aspect of a species that I'm super fascinated by. So this is awesome for me.
Yeah, you did a great job, man. It was a really good time.
Appreciate that. I guess before we wrap it, what does the future look like for you with your snakes? What are, obviously, aside from, like we said earlier, you want these animals to be around in 50 years. Do you have any goals that you're really aspiring towards while you're still, in the process of the future of you working with them?
Like I said, just being able to get out unrelated pairs to folks, being able to really perfect that permit process and teach
Mm.
others how to work through that process so that it's not a barrier to getting these animals across to all 50 states. I think that's important. I may, as the years go by, try to play around with introducing some of the more colorful Louisianas to some of the other more colorful Louisianas
Yeah.
to see if there's any potential for, some selective breeding there to be able to do that while still maintaining the integrity of the diverse, genes that I have within my group.
Yeah.
I think that's mostly what I'm shooting for. Keeping my collection small so I'm able to be attentive to it and that sort of thing, to know my animals and not have so many that where I get overwhelmed with what I have, and hopefully, just get more attention to these animals and how special they are. They are imperiled within their ranges. And so they're in, the only ones really left at this point are mostly in protected kind of habitats and things like that. And so that's going to be a really limited wild gene pool for each of those. And then to still kind of, I'll donate some of the proceeds I make from some of my offspring to Memphis Zoo for some of their, relocation they do, to maybe expand on that over time and do a little more with them to help them. Because they're doing some really good things out there for the wild, for the wild Louisianas, getting those back out to the wild.
For sure.
And just to continue to do things like this to educate people on these animals, so that future generations are able to see them and enjoy them, because they're really fascinating. Like I said, I've kept snakes for a long, long time, and these to me are the most amazing of all the snakes I've ever kept. And so just to be able to share that with folks, and hopefully, the snakes benefit from it.
Yeah, no question. Well, so for anybody who wants to keep up with your work, potentially get a hold of you for inquiring about animals, what's the best way for them to do that?
You can find me on Facebook. I'm a little old school. I'm not on any of the other different social media outlets, but yeah, you can certainly reach out to me on Messenger. If you send me a friend's request out of the blue, I probably won't accept it. So if you do send me a message with it and say, hey, I'm sending your request, this is why. And that's because I work really hard to keep certain things private and things like that because of the line of work that I'm in. But I'll, if folks want to send me something on Messenger, I'll try to be responsive to that. And, one thing I would say for myself and for you, Stephen, and all the other breeders out there is just, if folks are reaching out, it's really important to be respectful of the breeder's time. And I think that's one of the things we all run into is folks that'll reach out, they'll inquire, they'll get on a list, and they'll go through a certain process, sometimes even to the point where they get information on how to do permits or do that. And then they just kind of ghost the breeder. And so I would just say, be mindful of that kind of stuff. If folks are reaching out to breeders, not just me, but any breeders, be mindful of that, because you got to think that's time that person's putting into kind of following up with you and things like that. And I'm a little bit like the old Seinfeld episode with the soup Nazi. If someone doesn't follow up, I just block them and I move on. And then I might get a message 6 months or a year later, oh, so-and-so's trying to get in touch with you, they can't get you. I'm like, well, it means one of two things. Either they talked about crossbreeding something, or they didn't follow up with me when they were supposed to. And so I, like I said, this isn't a business for me. I do this because I love it. And so I don't have to do it. And so I just want to encourage the folks out there who are interested in reptiles that, most of these folks, their time is precious too. And so when you reach out and ask them questions, follow up with them and give them that respect that they're giving you. And so I'm not saying that to you, Stephen, but I'm saying that to the general public, when they reach out to us.
I'm glad you said it. I'll do you one better. Aside from not doing everything you just said, what's even worse, going through all of that, then buying the animal from somebody else, and then coming back to you to ask you questions about how to take care of it.
That's happened to me more than one time. And so
I've never wanted to reach through my phone and strangle somebody so bad.
Wow. I've had it happen. I've had it happen more than one time. And I'll even be the kind of person that and there's some really good guys in this, in this hobby. And so I've had folks reach out to me to ask for advice, and they're trying to get a permit so they can, work with a certain animal. And I would link them up with someone who had those animals, and they're like, I want to buy from you also. But then the other person finds out what they're trying to do. They give them an animal, and then they've got their animal. So like, no, I'm done. I changed my mind. And I'm like, I just did all this work for you, and then you kind of ditched me. And so I know that stuff happens a lot.
Yeah.
And then I'll have folks who want my animals, but they buy it from someone else, like as an animal that they got secondhand from somewhere else. I'm like, why wouldn't you just buy that from like the like, it meant so much to me this year to be able to get animals from Terry. Because I've read about Terry Vandeventer for 25 years and what he's done with Louisiana pines, and so to get animals directly from him was such an honor. I'm with you. I think people should honor some of that work that people put into the animals.
Yeah, no question. I mean, treat a breeder the way you'd want to be treated if the tables were turned.
That's good. That's a good way to put it. And so I think there's too many people that don't do that. They kind of like the tire kickers, and so I would just say, tell folks out there, just be mindful of that. We're putting a lot of work into what we do. And for a lot of us, it's not, like for me, it's not my full-time job. I do it because I love it. And so, just try to be respectful of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that's a great note to end it on. Michael, once again, thank you so much for being with me tonight. This was a great conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed every minute of it.
Thank you, Stephen. I did too, man. And reach out to me anytime and touch base with me sometime between now and next spring. We'll talk about those Louisianas.
Absolutely. Will do. All right. Well, everybody, thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for checking out the episode. I'll catch you all back here next week for a new show.